Staten Island has certainly always been viewed as unique, as a gem that is in the harbor that is unreachable. And of course, that is very much a part of being an island. And for years and years, it was that unreachable island. For most of its Western civilized existence, it wasn't connected to anything except by boats.
Whoa, Blackjack. Since its founding in 1909, the Richmond County Bar Association has been extremely active and at the forefront of the issues that not only affect us as attorneys, but our neighbors as well. So much has changed throughout the decades, yet in many respects, much remains the same. We may be a community that is growing in population and diversity, but we are still very much the biggest small town in America and reflect many of those small town values. That is why I and so many of my peers enjoy and value the practice of law in this community. Although Staten Island has retained much of its charm and uniqueness in the city of New York and around the state, there are many challenges in the legal field that we must continue to address to ensure that our voices are heard. With the creation of the 13th Independent Judicial District, the groundbreaking of our new court facilities, and the continued rise of our members to leadership positions throughout the judiciary and other branches of government, there's much to celebrate. So 100 years old may be an impressive stretch, but I predict that the best is yet to come for the Richmond County Bar Association. Staten Island's no longer a one-horse town.
We've always had a sense of camaraderie here on Staten Island, more so than I think some of the other counties, because again, the population, the very nature of the people who practice here and live here. Many of us are, in addition to being colleagues in the law, we're also friends.
The collegiality, the experience, the integrity, the honesty from this bar and from this bench is unprecedented, and I cannot say how proud I am to be a part of that group.
The family court where I first tried a case, in those days there was one judge who sat 3 days a week in the family court. The judge was finished by 1 o'clock every day, sometimes even before that. We did not have a local judge. The judge came from Brooklyn. He brought 2 court officers with him, and that was the extent of the security in the courthouse.
You know everybody, and therefore I think the fact that the attorneys know the judges well, and vice versa, and that the attorneys know each other bodes well for the public, because there is this relationship that people know each other.
As you were growing up with your friends and buddies and fellow ball players, whatever, you all basically were at the same economic level. It wasn't anybody who was poor or rich, maybe didn't have any money, but you sort of lived in either your own home or your family had a nice apartment. You were either a city worker, working for the city, or a professional, or some kind of a blue-collar worker.
One of the perhaps not so good things is that while you get a lot of referrals from clients and former clients and clients before that, you can also get a lot of bad-mouthing, because everybody at one time knew everybody else in Staten Island. You couldn't get on the ferry boat in the morning without knowing some story about somebody who just walked in front of you. I mean, that's just the way it was.
Regular people, you know, and it makes it easy to like people like that, you know, and that's why I felt very comfortable here. I really did. They took me in. They really took me in. The kid from Brooklyn, they took me right in and made me one of their own, and I just loved it.
I remember sitting in the appellate division one day, and an argument on a negligence case involving an automobile accident on Highland Boulevard. And the 2 lawyers who were arguing, neither one of them was from Staten Island. And they're trying to say how the accident happened. And I said, gentlemen, have either of you taken the time to go to the scene of the accident? And they both said no. I said, then you would find that it would have been impossible to make a left turn, as you plaintiff's counsel say, in front of you, because there's a median in that roadway. And we went on, and finally one of my colleagues leaned over and said to the lawyers, you made the mistake of asking that question and bringing up that point with a judge who knows the scene, who's from Staten Island.
Any lawyer that's been around a while could tell you Richard Riggi stories that'll have you rolling in the aisle. I'll tell you a couple of Richard Riggi stories. I was fortunate enough to be right next to him at 15 Beach Street. His office was in room 210, mine was in 207. And we became very close friends. One day, his secretary called me in. She said, Mr. Leddy, do you think maybe you could just walk into Mr. Riggi's office, walk around the office, pull a book off the shelf, look at the book for a second, put the book back on the shelf, and then walk out of the office? Now, you might think that's odd, you see, but knowing Richard Riggi, that was perfectly normal to do something like that. I had no idea what for, but he wanted me to do it, so I did it. So I walk into his office, and there is Richard Riggi, a very heavy-set guy, and whenever he sat down, his leg was swinging back and forth like this, and he was, listening to the client and laughing and sort of cavorting with the client. And I pull the book off the shelf, and I'm looking at the book, and Riggi says to his client, he says, this is Mr. Leddy. He's working on the federal aspects of your case. I didn't know the guy from a hole in the wall.
We had a member of this bar, Seymour Adams. He went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court on an issue, and he made the law, and it's now the law of the land. In a non-jury trial before the late Mr. Justice Barlow, Seymour Adams, representing the defendant, was denied the right to open and close because it was a non-jury trial. Well, Seymour took the case all the way up, lost everywhere except in the United States Supreme Court. And they established as the law of the land, based upon this appeal by a Richmond County bar lawyer, that in a non-jury case, a party has an absolute constitutional right to make an opening and closing address.
If you were to single out entities or individuals who accomplished what only a few years ago was thought to be impossible, our own separate judicial district, I think that the Richmond County Bar Association has to take the lion's share of the credit for that, because it is something that the Bar Association had championed at least since the 70s, probably even before that. So the fact that we now have our own judicial district is due largely to the Richmond County Bar Association.
We are a profession. We should be proud of our profession and carry out the mandates of that profession, which have nothing to do really with business. That, and of course the introduction of the fair ladies into the profession, had an enormous effect on the bar as well. It forced the gentlemen of the bar to perhaps become a little more courteous in recognition of the fairer sex in their presence.
We were the first bar to have a female president way back in the very early 70s, and that was Clelia D'Alessandro.
I think that women being in the courts and having such a mission of being strong advocates for their client makes a stronger legal system, because everybody knows that they have to be as well prepared.
Richard Riggi calls me in. He says, Dan, he says, there's a man out in my waiting room. Do you know who he is? So I poked my head out the window, out the door. I said, no, I've never seen him before. He said, well, he said that he hired me about 6 months ago to handle his case. He wants to know what's going on, and I don't remember him. I don't know anything about him. And he's very annoyed. He's agitated. He wants to know what's going on. So I said, no, Richie, I've never seen him before. What are you going to do? He says, I know how to handle this. So he gets the guy in his office, and he leans forward, and he says, now I want you to tell me everything you told me 6 months ago. And the man says, Mr. Riggy, you've had my case 6 months. Riggy says, do what I tell you. I know there's a purpose behind this. I know what I'm doing. I want you to tell me exactly what you told me 6 months ago. And so the man starts recalling and reciting what he had told him 6 months ago. And it was an odd story in itself. The story was that the man was traveling up the New York State Thruway at 2 o'clock in the morning when he had to relieve himself. And he got out of the car to relieve himself, and he relieved himself on what turned out to be a satchel of like $30,000 worth of negotiable bonds that were laying on the side of the Thruway. So this being a good, upstanding citizen, he turned the money in rather than steal the money. But he wanted a reward, and the post office wouldn't give him a reward. They just thanked him. So they went to Riggy to try to get, he went to Riggy to try to get some kind of a reward. And I guess Riggy must have told him, don't worry about it, I'll see if I can get your reward. But in any event, Riggy forgot about all this. So now the man's back in the office, wants to know what's going on in the case. And Riggy is listening closely as the guy is repeating the story. Then after the guy finishes the story, Riggy says, you know something, he said, as you were talking, I was comparing in my mind everything that you told me 6 months ago to what you told me now. And you told me the exact same story both times. You didn't deviate even the slightest bit. So I know you're telling the truth. Now I'm sure I can help you. So that's how he got himself out of that problem.
1, 2, 3. Hey! All right. Hey! How about on the board?
This morning, we're excited to break ground on a spectacular new $220 million criminal and Supreme Court complex. Not only will this be the borough's first new courthouse in more than 75 years, before I was born, the city is making the biggest capital investment in a building in Staten Island's history. This investment will also help drive the incredible renaissance that's taking place here in St. George. We are building for the future of this borough, even during these tough times for our economy. We're not walking away from our responsibility to our children and our grandchildren. The investments that we make now will give them a better life.
Our association represents our attorneys, and all of its energy should be pointed at increasing and improving the image of the attorneys amongst the general members of the bar. We as attorneys sometimes are pessimistic. There's so darn many lawyer jokes that we get tired of hearing them. We get tired of hearing people who decry our profession. And I say to them, nonsense. All I know is that most people that I talk to would love to have their children become attorneys, if not doctors, become lawyers. And they'd be very proud to have their son or daughter as an attorney.
When a person is dealing with a lawyer, it's very often, probably most of the time, something that's very, very important to that person. It could be important financially, it could be important in terms of his freedom, you know, and when you lose, it hurts, and you take it out on the lawyers.
Richard III wanted to complete his conquest in England, and it's always attributed to Shakespeare. He said, kill all the lawyers. Well, what was the reason he said that? Because he knew that the lawyers would be an effective force in curbing his ambitions to become an absolute monarch and a tyrant. So my advice, stand up, let your voice be heard, and be proud to be an attorney and a member of the bar, and in particular the Richmond County Bar.
The residents of the community, the clients, the future clients of the lawyers can look to the Bar Association as a resource, a place where they can go to get information, to assure themselves that the practice of law in Staten Island is at its ethical best, and to feel comfortable in reaching out to a lawyer in their times of need. That's the challenge for the next 100 years for the Richmond County Bar Association, and with the commitment of the lawyers and the talented judges of Richmond County, I'm convinced that the bar will be more than up to meeting that challenge.